Hello, my name is Michael Green and I welcome you to my podcast dedicated to the exploration of the lives and careers of historians who live nowadays. I come from the University of Lodz, from the Faculty of Philosophy and History, and today I will be talking to the famous Dutch professor Willem Frijhoff. Willem Frijhoff is renowned for his multiple works on early modern religious history, social history, cultural history, history of language, history of persecution, and I will be asking him about his academic career, about his motivation. How did he even arrive to study history? What were the reasons for that? So I welcome Professor Frijhoff in my podcast. Dear Willem, welcome to this podcast.
Thanks.
This is the very first one that I'm making, first one ever actually. But as explained to you in my introductory email, we are going to talk about your life and academic career and the way that you became the historian you are. And first of all, happy birthday, past birthday, but it was just 2 weeks ago. It was.
Thank you. This was my 80th birthday, so I'm quite old. But well, you know, nobody is born historian. You always you develop your life in directions, and my direction finally came out in the historian's job. I see it as a job, not as a vocation. You know, it is. I think it's work I have to do, and if you have to do work, you have to do it seriously. That's the point.
That's
the
an
first thing I
interesting
want to
point.
say.
That's actually a very interesting point because for many people it seems that being a historian is a vocation, and that's exactly what I wanted to ask you about. So. You were born in Zutphen, and
I'm born in Zutphen in a medium-sized city of a town in the Netherlands, a very old town. It goes back to the 9th century, and it still is rather well conserved. And I think that's an important thing of my career. I have the heritage of the town always in myself. I have it with me, and I'm very involved in the history of the town. I went there quite a lot of times when I was able to do so. It's not possible anymore because of my health problems. But I think it's important for a historian, for any historian, to be. I would say to have a place. What's your place where you can identify with? And that's my birth town is the place I can identify with. But it's not the place that's the only one in my life. I live in Rotterdam, and I'm very happy in Rotterdam. I'm not going to go back to my birthplace, but there's something that is, I think, an important point of identification in my life.
Well, I could definitely relate to that because I was born in Kiev and I moved to many places in my life,
Yes.
but I still Kiev still has a special place always in my heart. But you started your studies not as a historian. You started actually in
no. I'm not a historian by from the start. From the start, I started to study in a seminary, a Roman Catholic seminary in the Archbishopship of Utrecht, where I live. I'm Catholic. You see, in the Netherlands. Most people think that there are only Protestants in the Netherlands, but that's not true. There are quite a lot of Catholics, and my family from both sides pertains to the Catholic population, and but my parents were both my parents were from a rather poor background. My father was a photographer, and that's I would say. a little bit better than my mother. My mother was really from a poor background. My grandfather was the son of a peasant, and he didn't have any money, but he had 10 children. And my other grandfather had 14 children. You know, I have quite a lot of uncles and aunts
it's quite a big
and
family.
nephews. Yeah, that's the extended family we have in the Netherlands and in the Catholic part of the Netherlands. But well, when I grew up in my birth town, I was always interested in history, but also, I was a boy who loved to read, and there were no books in my parents' home. That's that they didn't come from intellectual families, but there were other people in my neighborhood who had an encyclopedia, and I tried to read the whole encyclopedia, things like that. So I love to read. And at the end of the primary school, I said I want to go to the seminary, because for me that was the intellectual achievement I had to do. And in the seminary, that was of course for was meant to foster the vocation as a priest, and I achieved the whole seminary education, and I was ordained a priest when I was 24 years old. But that didn't. I would say I didn't remain in the sacerdotal vocation. It was, so for me it was more an intellectual formation than an ecclesiastical vocation, I think. And what I did on the seminary is work in the library and read many things. Not only history, but also philosophy, theology, quite a lot of things. New philosophers and new theologians. I read a lot of Teilhard de Chardin, if you know the name. He was very popular in the 60s, in the 50s and the 60s, but also of other philosophers and theologians who learned me a lot about the world and the way to interpret what happens in the world. And when I had finished my study at the seminary, the Archbishop of Utrecht, was my diocese, sent me to Paris to continue my study in, I would say, in something rather not very precise. The idea was that I had to do studies of the history of spirituality. Mm-hmm. But what is the history of spirituality? So I went to Paris, and I must say I could make the choice myself for the place where I had to go. He said you can see where you can best study that. So I chose Paris because I knew other friends who said, you have to go to Paris, that's the place to do, and the place to be, and that's quite right. For me, Paris was in revelation. It was a new world that opened for me. And what I did, I studied not in the Catholic University of Paris, but in the secular one. And that was a good decision, because that meant that I was not taken in the Catholic universe, but in the normal world of the French people and of the development of history. So that's what I did, and I studied in Paris. The only problem was that I didn't have much money. So what I took quite a lot of small jobs to have a bit more money to live there with my friends, and quite a lot of friends I made there. I still see them. On my anniversary date 2 weeks ago, there were some of them who I had met there in the 60s. And so the people I know since 40 years, you know, we still see each other and we still speak with each other.
That's what we call friends for life. But was it
that's what you call friends for life? Yes.
Was it difficult for you to make this shift from seminary into university, and why did you actually decide to go to study at this? I think it was.
At École des Hautes Études, École des Hautes Études, and University Paris 4. That's where I studied. Mm-hmm. No, it was not difficult because I had already much more intellectual luggage than most of the students. And for most of the students, I was an older people, you know. I was 24 years old, and most of them were 17, 18 at most. So I immediately had a lot of friends. People came to see me, and quite a lot saw me and said, "Well, can we speak or discuss things like that?" So it was for me. It was a very good experience to go to Paris and to speak with other people from another intellectual background, you know. It was difficult, and I learned a lot. And the most important point was that I had to find a place to live, and I found a room in a house of the religious congregation, the Lazarists. You don't know if you know them. They have quite a lot of people in the east, and there was a convent in my birth town. So they said you can go there. I took a room. Very simple room, but then the interesting point was that in that home of the Lazarists, there were quite, I would say, some 40 young students from many countries in the world, and countries I didn't know at all. Palestine, for example, Yugoslavia, etc., Poland, people who were there, and so I learned a lot. I had a terrible experience of things that were totally unknown to me, and they, many of them have still remain friends. But it was a very important experience, and for me, it was also a way to go into history. Because, I was interested by history, but I didn't have a formation as a historian. By and by, I got that knowledge of the history of other people, of other countries, etc., and it made me, I would say, a broad historian. Not simply historian, but historian interested by broad segments of reality.
And that's exactly what I find fascinating in your work, is that you actually address many different aspects of history and different countries, and you're not only focused on the Netherlands or France, but you touch upon other places, and you deal with history of culture and history of education, history of religion, and many aspects. And for me, as a PhD student who met you back in the day, it was something that I was looking up to, because I thought, wow, it's actually possible to do different things, not just focusing on one. But I wonder if some people didn't see it actually as a weak point, because, you know, field of history sometimes is a field where people specialize and then get so specialized on that particular little aspect of history that they don't really care about anything else. And if you are not specialized on that little aspect, then it could be perceived as something for some people, as a weakness. What do you think about that?
Well, that's... I think that a specialization is important. I have specializations too. One of them is the history of education, and another one is history of spirituality. So I would say things I read more about than other things. And I am known in the scientific world as a man interested by cultural history, things like that, Mm-hmm. Economic history is not something I'm interested in. It's important, I know, I'm not against, but it's not something that's my point, I would say, things like that. And even the political history, I know it's important to know political situations, but it's not the point. I'm not a field of history I'm going to work in. So I think it's a good thing to specialize a bit, but you have to remain open and to find new fields. For example, I worked a lot on quite a lot of things, and when I was working on the history of, not spirituality, you would say, but history of the cultural history, I discovered a young boy in a Dutch town of the 17th century who lived interesting experiences, mystical experiences, and went to North America. So what I did is I specialized in, I would say, in the history of that part of North America, the New Netherlands. And if you're specialist, you discover things you do not know and do not discover if you do not go into the history of such a country. But what I'm now interested in is how did that Dutch boy in North America, live with the people there. The people, I would say, the Indians, because there were quite a lot of them, and he was not against them. He lived with them. He had a day-to-day conversation with them. Well, I can't know those conversations, but I know how they live together. Did they work together? Did they fight together? Things like that, So that's things what I'm going to what I'm working on and now. No, I have worked on it. On this moment, I'm not really working on it anymore. I'm working on other things, but that's, I think, a kind of specialization is important, and the only thing is you never should specialize outside the broad spectrum of history. Always know that history is more than that you have to remain open for I would say the general history.
Thank you. I have one more question about your education in France. And I wonder how you found your supervisor. What was the system like back then? Were you approached? Because I read that you had your dissertation with, if I understand actually correctly, with Alphonse Dupron.
Yes, Alphonse Dupron. He was, my supervisor. I found him in the third year of my study at the Sorbonne. I had to write a master's thesis, and then afterwards another one. And for the master's thesis, I asked him to supervise it, because it was on a rather special theme on pilgrimages. I was interested by pilgrimages as part of the history of spirituality, mm-hmm. And I did quite a lot of research on them. I wanted to write a master's thesis on pilgrimages in Dutch history. So Dupron had also written a lot about pilgrimages and Catholic cults. I asked him if he would supervise it, and he accepted. And once I had achieved the master thesis, he asked me to work with him in his well, well, he had not really an institute, but something like that, he would say. He was interested by my approach, and I worked more than 10 years with him. And
He was
it was
director
not
of
really hard.
he was director of the Sorbonne, wasn't he?
He became director of the Sorbonne, yes, in a later stage. And at the start, he was only a professor, but he was professor, and he worked also at one of those specialized French institutes, the École Pratique de Hautes Études, and things like that, you know. So he was someone very important, but he had also a rather curious character. He was difficult to approach, and but many of the most important French historians were his disciples. So that's I was rather proud to have worked with him. I think it's on my without him I never had been so precise as him now, because he was very precise. You know, every fault was a problem. Immediately he said, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't say that, etc., etc. But I'm glad to have been there. And yes.
Yes, well, I have a question that is connected to this, actually, about relationship with supervisors, because we know that PhD students and their supervisors often have rather difficult. Sometimes it's love-hate, sometimes it's parental feelings, sometimes it's total mistrust. And I wonder, how was it for you?
The attitude of the supervisors, you mean?
Yeah. And the attitude of the students also, the relationship between the two. Because it's something that shapes the future PhD student in a certain way.
Yes, that's right, but I didn't do my PhD with him.
Aha, okay.
No, my PhD I did it with a Dutch scholar, Hans Bots. He was and Harry van den Ehrenbeem. I did it when I had returned in the Netherlands. And anyway, Dupont was very difficult for PhDs. So I'm not sure I would have done it with him, because he his own PhD, he did it after, I think, 30 years after the end of his study. And in France, you know, the whole problem of PhDs, it's difficult. Yeah. I was a supervisor of 5 or 6 French PhDs, and it's always a problem. It never goes simply. They have problems with the other supervisors, or the supervisor says it's not enough, you have to do it again, and more and more and more. That's not my idea. In the Netherlands, we have a easier way of dealing with that. But in France, where Dupont as a supervisor of my master's thesis, that was quite good. He was very content with what I did. It was a very important text. It was 500 pages or something like that. Yeah,
like a doctoral dissertation, in fact.
Yes, that was it. Would have been a dissertation in the Netherlands, but in France, no. In France, everything was much more voluminous than in our way. But he was very content with my master's thesis about the pilgrimages. So that's. I was content too.
And why did you decide to go back to the Netherlands? Why didn't you continue your career in France if it went so well?
No, that was quite easy. There was no future for me in France. It was in the 70s, and you know, in the 70s, France had financial problems, and people who didn't have a fixed job at the university, what was my case, I just had a very unstable job, had to go back. And so I could go back because I had a professor in the Netherlands who accepted to my PhD, and not only accepted my PhD, but after the PhD, immediately he gave me a job at the University of Tilburg, which is a rather small university. It was a rather small university, but it was a stable job, and with a salary that was three times what I had in France, because in France the salaries are very low, and still are, I know. But so that was the reason I would have remained in France, because in the meantime I had married a French girl who is my wife now, but that was not possible. I couldn't remain there for financial and job reasons. But in the meantime, that has changed. It has changed a bit. It's easier to remain in France now.
But you finished your PhD at what nowadays people would say that it's quite an advanced age of 39. When I was doing my PhD, I finished it when I was 32 and defended when I was 33. I was considered to be not among the youngest. There were colleagues who were 27 when they finished. And what
No, was I? Yes, please.
So I wonder, when you it was in 1983, I think, that you finished, you finished your PhD.
Yes.
And I wonder, how was the job situation then? Was it a problem that you finished at rather advanced age comparing to some young people?
No, it was quite normal, and to say more, in the university where I went, the University of Tilburg, I was one of the very rare people who finished the dissertation. It was the most of them remained without a dissertation. They worked in a very simple, unfinished and undissertationed way, you know. I was one of the very rare people who did it. But after that, it has become the rule that you have to finish your dissertation before you get a job. But in my time, it was not that way. But I wanted to do it because I had a theme that was on the history of education. My dissertation is on university students in the past, and it was a big work on the university students. That was the consequence of what I did in Paris with some friends, and I wanted to finish that. And I was one of the first who achieved that theme in the Netherlands and in France also, because it was a quantitative study on students in the past, and people were very charmed by what I did, because it was a new way to approach university history. The university history before was always about professors, and mine was about students, and that is the difference, you know.
It was a major shift, of course, shifting from the decision makers into those who are actually.
Because I always have been more interested by people, by normal people, than by the chiefs, I would say. I'm working now on this. I think it's the last big work I'm doing. I do it since 10 years already, on a thing like a book on a family who lived in France and in the Netherlands and in Norway, the Ilkens family. It was a Catholic family, and the reason why I do it is because it's a normal family. I'm not interested in politicians. I'm interested in how normal people live, what they do, how they work together, etc., etc. And that's what I did also, in fact, in my work on the university students. It was a dissertation with, I think, something about 25,000 students. And It was quantitative. I quantified the output, and in the meantime, I wrote some articles on special groups, on particular students. That was the way to combine the general work and a more specified work. That's it.
Well, I am looking forward to read that book. I read your article that you wrote for the privacy volume about that family, and I think that there's so much still awaiting that I would be among the first readers, I think. But I wanted to come back to the job situation, because very shortly after you finished your dissertation, you were appointed as professor already. So there were no intermediate stages, actually, which is quite a remarkable achievement, I would say, in academia, because normally there's a very long tenure track and postdocs and many other things. And I wanted to ask you, how did you do it, if I can be so direct?
No, I didn't do it. The others did do it.
Okay.
I asked the job, but the point is evidently that before my nomination as professor, I had quite a lot of years when I worked on an intermediate level, not as professor and neither as a simple researcher, but something between the two. And they recognized that. The more so, as I wrote, I had quite a lot of publications already when I was nominated as professor. And the only point is that I had very few experience as in teaching. That was the difficulty, because in France I couldn't teach. I didn't have the right to teach. And when I came back to the Netherlands, my experience in teaching was very scanty. So I had to work a lot to make it better. And the University of Tilburg, where I came, was very good for that, because it was not a university with a history department. It was sociology where I came, and that were normal students, not very. It was not an intellectual achievement. I had just to work, and for me that was a good period to learn how to teach simple things to normal students. And when I had done that 2 years, I was named at the University of Rotterdam. And I was ready for it in that moment. I had my research experience, my teaching experience, and the only thing I didn't have is the political or the managerial experience that come afterwards.
And since then you went on also to be professor at the Vrije Universiteit, so the Free University of Amsterdam from 1997. Yes. And you also worked at the Erasmus University, so you've been in many places. And you
again. I came back to the Erasmus after my retirement, but the point is, at the Erasmus where I was, we had a lot of problems because the Ministry of Education wanted to cut down the faculty. So I worked a lot for to rescue the university, and that gave me a lot of, I would say, goodwill in the Netherlands. It was one of the reasons why I could rather easily become professor at the Free University of Amsterdam. And the Free University, was in the beginning was a Protestant university. Mm-hmm. Well, I'm not a Protestant; I'm a Catholic, and I'm a rather professing Catholic, I would say. But that was not a problem there. They understood that if you believe in something, that's enough. But at the Free University, the same thing happened as Erasmus University. The direction wanted to cut down the faculty, and that's very difficult if you are dean or something like that, because you have to defend your people and to create possibilities for new initiatives and things like that. So I spent a lot of time on at the rescue operations of the two faculties, and I would say that was not a nice time always. It's rather I didn't have the time to work for myself, and I had to cure other people.
But you succeeded.
That's what happened.
You succeeded.
Huh?
You succeeded in your task.
I succeeded in both cases. Yes, in Rotterdam. Well, I was not the only one, but there were other people involved in that. But in Rotterdam, the faculty was saved, and we also was extended a bit. And at the Free University, it was saved also, but it changed a lot. It was not a history faculty anymore, but more something like faculty of culture. Well, that's not exactly precise. That's a very rather vague term, but it works. It works.
And then, well, you said that you didn't have time to do your own research so much, but I have looked at your list of publications, which I think was not complete because many of the things that I know were not on it. But you have an immense track record of publications, really, I think, remarkable.
Yes.
And I wondered, how did you have time both to be involved in, well, in this case, rescuing universities, having a child, teaching a lot, supervising many PhD students. My former PhD supervisor, was also your PhD back in the day. And you still conducted so much research in so many different fields and published long books, long articles, and all in a rather short period of time.
Yes. Well, the books, there are not very many books. It's more... I'm more working with the work of others for books, and I wrote 3 or 4 books, but not more than that. But
it's still quite a lot.
The point is, I'm a worker. I was born as someone who likes to work, to spend time with my sources and make something about it. And I'm a worker. I'll ask my wife. She doesn't like that always, but I always am working on something like that. Nowadays, I'm in the evening. I do not do it anymore. I'm looking television or film or something like that. But normally I was a worker, so that means coming home, I took my books or my things, and I'm able to work hard in small time, to do many things in small time, because I'm very organized. That's the point. And I'm not. I do not lose time. I always know what I'm going to do in the morning, and that's important if you want to achieve something. I think you have to make something of your day, and I had always formerly, when they are not laptops, I always had paper on. So I wrote things for the things I had to write. So it was always an organized operation.
So you were conscious about what you write and how you write and what is next on the line, and you were keeping track of what you're doing. I'm just saying it because I think students sometimes don't understand the importance of making this kind of organization, to organize in your working environment, working schedule, and to know actually what you're going to do. So I think it's very important that you mention it. And speaking about writing and publishing, and we have the peer review system, which is sometimes seems very good, sometimes seems unfair, and sometimes there is criticism coming from the peer reviewer that can be at times very helpful, but sometimes can be very direct and sometimes even rude. So how did you deal with this? Because it seems to me that the bigger researcher is, the more known researcher is, maybe it's more difficult to deal with it, or actually not.
Yes, well, you don't have fear for criticism. It's important to know that in our world, the world of history, nothing is really fixed. It's always a question of interpretation. That's the thing you should always tell yourself. That means that other people always can say, no, that's not true. And then you have to prove that it is true, if you are able to do it. It's not. There's never an absolute opinion in our world, and I think that's important to know that, because as we do it ourselves, I criticize people also quite a lot. And that's the point you have to tell yourself. I'm not perfect. Other people can say something. So if they say something against me, I have to look after it and see if it is really true, if it holds, and if I have to change something. So in my work, it's the same thing. You never know if what you write is definite, if it's the final world. I don't think so. That doesn't exist, the final world. If you have a little experience with history, you know that the meanings of the ideas, the opinions of historians of the past are always criticized 100 years or 50 years afterwards, because other things come up, other meanings, the other context, and things like that. So that, I think I should be afraid of some criticism, even harsh criticism. But the point is, you never have to tell something against the men or the women who says it. It goes. The criticism is always on his history, on historical things, not on the historian himself. That's not a point. It never should be an attack on the professional historian.
Yeah, I think that this advice should be really heard, not only by those who receive the criticism, but also by those who give it. I think it's a very important point. And I wonder, where do you think our field of history is heading at? Because we see nowadays that history departments are in some sort of crisis. We know that there are almost no jobs in history. But and we see also that the numbers of students sometimes or quite often, are less than they used to be 20, 30, 40 years ago. Do you see a future for us as historians?
Well, I'm not sure that the Department of History as such is important. As an historian, you can work in all the jobs. A historian can work in sociology, can work in medicine, etc. And I would say, please try to apply your historical formation to other domains where it can be useful. And that's what I did, because I worked in the social history, but in fact in sociology, but also in medical history and things like that. And so that means that I worked with people from those terrains in order to create something that goes beyond history as such. That is I would say a new domain with a new combination knowledge, of fields of knowledge. I think that's important. I don't know if this responds to what you ask, but I wouldn't be. I'm not very afraid that history goes down. You know, that's then the idea of history, of the period of history departments that were very closed departments with their own theories and their own, I would say, patriarchs that covered what they did, and something like in France Prodel and people like that, who was only historian, and if you are a historian, you have to go to him. I think that period is finished. We need to be more open to the way history can be conjugated with other terrains of life. Does that correspond a bit to what you asked?
Yes, yeah. I think it's really an interesting answer, and also I think you show the way how one can deal with issues relating to finding your own place within the field of history, even if it's not within the history department as such. And maybe for the end, I will ask you a very cliché question that you probably were asked many times before, but just for the sake of this podcast, I will ask it again. Is there any particular advice that you could give to students or young PhD students or even young postdocs who just finished their PhD about finding their way in the academia, about finding the motivation, how to motivate yourself to continue and not to give up?
I would say remain open to new things. That's the point. Well, one of the difficult elements of the history education nowadays is that people are educated in a very close way. You are in the department and history is history. That's not the point. It's what I said some minutes ago. Remain open and try to find new ways of working in history, but also in the fields pertaining to the broader world in which history is, because history is always a way of looking at the world. It's not more than that. It's the it concerns people and things that have a historical thickness, I would say, but that you have to work with in order to give them meaning. And history is about meaning. It's about the meaning yourself, the meaning you can give to things. But I think, because that's also a point what I just said. You always have to ask yourself, where am I with regard to the historical events, to the historical world, etc. Where do I stay? Am I just a follower of others, or do I try to find a new personal way of dealing with the world around me? And that personal way has a historical dimension, but it's not the historical dimension is something that's not. I would say that's not independent from me. It's something that comes from my own intellectual formation, etc., etc. So I would say remain open and try to find your way in a broad field of things that together make history, but history in the sense of the past.
Thank you very much. I found our conversation really fascinating, and I'm sure that everyone who will listen to this talk will learn a lot and get also motivated. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I hope that everything goes well with you and your students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.